So this is the best that a white boy from the suburbs of Chicago can do to impersonate somebody with thousands of dollars with musical equipment and microphones for free at home. Before we get in, the number one thing that you want because you clicked on this video is this next tip, because I'm going to show exactly how I got this vocal that you're about to hear in a second. But the thing that you need to know is you will never sound like Travis Scott.
Those goosebumps every time, yeah. You come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those colors, you're way too dumb, yeah. I'm way too dumb, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yeah. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, when you throw it to the side, yeah. Every time.
The reason why I say you'll never sound like Travis Scott isn't because you won't get a good mic sound. It's because, like, if you're trying to imitate anybody, you're never going to be them, and at best you'll be a copycat. Here is Alex Toomey talking about how important the first tip in getting a good vocal sound is.
But Travis's performance is into a microphone are so fine-tuned. Straight up, I would say, like, straight up vocal tone going into a mic, Travis Scott is unmatched. I think that's a huge part in his success, is literally, like, I don't know anybody else that can just put a double or 100% on a vocal that still sounds cool.
Alex Toomey, you just saw, released his vocal template already. If you wanted to know what to sound like Travis, theoretically, you should already know, right? You should just be able to copy his template because he mixed it, and the template should make you sound like Travis, but try it. Go. It doesn't work. You need to sound good before you get into the effects. That's why you'll never sound like Travis Scott, because the reason he sounds so good is because it's his voice. Now, you could optimize for your voice with things that he does, and I'll go into how to make your voice sound better than it does. I'll go over the effects of what you need once you have a good vocal take done. Just in case you didn't see it, here is every single vocal that I had. I had over 40 takes over this past month of that 15-second clip that you just saw. Like, that's how much I'm obsessing over how much I need to get good before I get on the microphone. The effects were all done in Soundtrap for free. Here we go. This was the easiest part because it took the least amount of effort going into the mic. The auto-tune does so much for these ad-libs. By the way, this is Soundtrap Premium. You could get a free trial link down below for an extended period of time, so check that out if you don't have the premium version of Soundtrap, but this is all for free. The original sounds like this. Yeah. I don't think Travis sounded like that going into his setup, but that's how I said it, and then the auto-tune really worked. Rest of the ad-libs sound like this. Also, in the intro, I had that little fluty, falsetto sounding vocal. Sounds like this. I put this on the third selection in the Soundtrap Auto-Tune, by the way, and the fifth one was what I used for the ad-libs. Heavy on the ad-libs, medium for this flute sound in the beginning. Here's where we start getting into the main points, and I don't need to explain this for many other vocals because the concept I'm going to show next is going to go for all those. Do a duplicate reverb track. You can see right here, I have 2 tracks doing that flute sound, and the original, which is just a dry vocal only with EQ and compression, sounds like this. And that's because the reverb is on a separate track, duplicated exactly what I'm doing, and it's compressed after the reverb. If you just put that reverb dial on any dry vocal, that is a guaranteed amateur sound. It's a tip that I use all the time in Soundtrap. Use doubles. Don't have the reverb and your vocal on the exact same track if you can't add effects to them separately. The reverb sounds like this. The chain for the main vocal looks like this. It just has a bunch of dipping EQ in the low end, which is something I go over in this video. Super key to making things bright. Don't use brightener to boost it. Cut the low end. And then I go super aggressive on the high end because once I have these compressors, it ended up really compensating for me. A bunch of these high moves were made after the compressors were put in because it was such heavy compression. In retrospect, I could have ducked down a little bit on this, but this is what I used for you just heard. After that, make sure you pay attention to the attack times and ratios and release times for these compressors. They're key. Do not use the compressor one on things. You have to have some control over your compressors with a dynamic compressor that has attack, release, and threshold and ratio settings. Having a high attack time on the compressor gives it more of a natural and upfront sound, along with a shorter release time. The release time was key to this. I did not go long in the release times at all. I made sure it snapped back really quick. I also had a 9-to-1 ratio. It's such heavy compression on this first vocal. I kept the knees neutral, and then on the second one I had a medium attack time, even slower on the release time, and that did not touch the vocal as much. The gain reduction you'll see on this right side isn't as much on this one because it's a subtle compressor. It was just this second one to add a little bit more compression to the main vocal. Gain reduction didn't go down hardly at all. The ratio was at 4. And you'll hear on this reverb track, I did the exact same thing with the EQs, but I cut all that high end off. You don't need too sparkly of a high end with your reverb track. And then I put a wide room right after the EQ because I wanted it before the compressors. Once you're compressing the reverb, that really can work with a Travis Scott song. I'm not sure exactly if they did that because they had very high-end reverbs, but don't be afraid to compress your reverbs. If you compress them, it parks the reverb in this one spot right behind the vocal, wherever you put it, depending on your volume. Super works. Do not be afraid to compress your reverbs. I had the exact same 2 compressors that I had in the original vocal. I just shoved that wide room preset reverb right behind it. I also had another room reverb right after those compressors because it just gave it such more width, for one, which was a huge part about Travis Scott ad-lib reverbs and regular reverbs, and I just wanted it to be more wet. Soundtrap reverbs do a dry wet even when it's 100%, so I just wanted this to be pretty far. Went in with the secondary EQ. This was the finalizing quote-unquote EQ that I heard. I wanted the frequencies cut a little bit in the bass like this and a little bit boosted on the top again because I took a little bit too much out, and then I added 2 more subtle compressors. One is doing a lot. It has a very small attack time, very low threshold, but it's a 2 ratio. Pretty high on the release time too. It really squashes this reverb. You don't hear the intricacies of the reverb. You just want that wash of sound to be parked right behind him. And then I also did this compressor too. You don't need those, especially if you're using high-end reverbs. For most cases, I wouldn't add these 2 compressors at the end. It's just what I happen to do here. Again, together they sound like this. It really works on the tune, and the main reverbs for the tracks follow the exact same philosophy as the reverb that I just showed. That's why I went into so much detail. We could see that with what I called B main reverb, the beginning vocals reverb look exactly like this fluty beginning sounding reverb. It has the exact same EQ settings that you'll see I go into. It has a dark EQ at the front. It takes off a bunch of the high end, adds a wide room reverb sound, 2 compressors right after that. They're almost the exact same. I went a little bit more subtle with this extra reverb just because it was a main vocal. You heard it more. Added the exact same type of EQ and 1 type of compressor to squash everything up. It's just EQing and compressing. Once you develop that ear for EQing and compressing after the reverbs, and again, it parks it in a certain place, and it sounds like this.
I get those goosebumps every time you come around it. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those colors.
It sounds super ugly right now, but it totally works in the track. That's the compressors working. That's why you don't mix in solo. You don't just listen to instruments alone. That's a huge tip. Listen to things in the mix. This works in the mix because it is so compressed and wet, and it doesn't work alone because of that reason, but nobody's listening to your song individually wise. So do that. Listen to it with everything. That's a priority over solo. The whole beginning thing sounds like this.
I get those goosebumps every time you come around it. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those colors. You're way too numb, yeah. I'm way too dumb, yeah.
If you noticed in there, that reverb sounded like it came a little bit behind. It didn't sound like it matched the original vocal sound, and here's exactly why. If we go in really close, we can see that these top 2 tracks are the main vocal drive, so they're the exact same timing, and the reverb one, which is on the bottom right here, is shifted a little bit forward in time. That's naturally adding pre-delay to the vocal reverb. I go over it a bunch in this video. As you can see, we have 3 tracks here instead of 2 like the previous vocal sound, and that's because the second one you can see is a main compression track. Here's what that does. was. Here's just the main vocal.
You come around there.
Here's the main vocal with the compression track.
You come around there.
More in your face without changing the tone of it. Parallel compression track, I also go over it in this video. I simply take the chain that's on the main one, duplicate it, and add a lot more heavy compressors to the end of the chain. I'll go over the main chain for the main vocal right now. Just like before, we're very aggressive in cutting the low end. Despite this even being a low vocal itself, you still need a bunch of that cut. Surprisingly, it isn't lacking low end in the final version, despite me cutting a lot of it out right here. I also have a ton of top shimmer onto this. I usually don't do that, but again, that's just how this vocal sounded, and I have an ear for compression. It didn't sound too bad to me. And again, almost the exact same compressors that were on there before. High attack time, high ratio, low release time, paired with one that's hardly touching the vocal with a medium attack time, very low release time, and an average ratio. They all sound like this.
I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. You come around, yeah. You ease my mind, you make everything feel fine. Worry about those colors, you're way too low, yeah. I'm way too dumb, yeah.
You might have picked up I also faded in the compression track slightly at the beginning. It's because on the beginning it came in super hot, and fading it up got rid of that. It's a super cool little trick to make a vocal come in better. Only doing it on the compression track too, and not doing it on the main vocal would be too noticeable there, but not having that upfrontness just for a little bit and fading into that made it a lot more smoother to come in. To the main vocal.
I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yo.
Here's where the tips come in that I haven't ever shown before on this channel. But first, let's get to the main chain of the main vocal track. Looks pretty familiar, just sounds a little bit different. Again, I heard every single band, just made sure that every band was where I wanted it to be on the EQ, but I cut a bunch of the low end, added a bunch of the top end. Same type of compressors, they all worked well for this song like this. We have our parallel track, very familiar. We had the exact same EQ, the exact same two compressors, and one extra compressor that's working super hard on the vocal. Notice it's a huge ratio, very low attack time and very low release times. The compression track is also a lot lower in volume than the main vocal track. They sound like this together.
I get those goosebumps every time.
Here's the trick that I've never shown before, adding time specific delays. If you're in a bigger DAW, this is very easy, and you don't get it because Soundtrap only has that. Here's something that's super valuable to Soundtrap people. Let me play these two delays together and see if you notice what I did.
I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yo.
Did you notice it? They were exactly on time with each other. And if I had played the beat right there, they were exactly on time with the beat. Other plugins outside of Soundtrap have time specific delays. You get to choose if it's an eighth note delay, a quarter note delay, a 16th. Having the delays lock in time makes it such a cleaner delay sound, and here's how you get a locked in specific delay time linked to the tempo of your song when we only have these knobs to control the time in Soundtrap. I'm making a duplicate track just to show this method. You take a small bit of audio, very small like this, just a little tick. Turn the metronome on, make sure that little tick piece of audio is right on a downbeat, so right on this, it says measure 32, exactly on that beat. Then play the metronome. What you do is you change the time up or down depending on how this locks to the metronome. So right here, I'll show an example where it doesn't lock onto the metronome. See how they're off time from each other. It goes bum ba bum bum ba bum. So I made it go a little faster, made it go a little slower. Tiny, ever so tiny bit up. If you notice, it went bum, bum, bum. It's totally on time now. It's a quarter note delay. So make sure that while you're experimenting with this, you get the delay time on the track that you want, and then everything goes on that delay time, and then you don't touch the delay time. What I also did was panned two of them left to right and had one be a quarter note delay and one be an eighth note delay. So I basically just made it twice as fast for the other side. We had this earlier, and then I made another track and I did it like this. So one was bump, bump, and then the other was bump, bump, bump. That's exactly what Travis is using on the record. There's an eighth note delay in the left ear and a quarter note delay in the right. And you can see that I named them that here. Vocal delay right, vocal delay left. They both sound like this together again.
I get those goosebumps goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yo.
After those two delays were done, I also added a little bit of compression on top of some of them just to make them squashed and lowered a little bit so they're a little bit parked in each ear. The panning, by the way, was hard left and right. I took the pan knob on the main track and just went all the way to the left and all the way to the right on the left and right track. And the last track for the main vocal is very familiar. It's a parallel reverb track. It sounds like this.
I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yo.
Didn't compress this too heavy at all. I had one EQ just like every other reverb track has, the exact same EQ on it. Added this wide room reverb again, the two compressors that I have, one subtle wide room reverb more, and then I took just a tiny bit off the shimmery top end of the reverb. Again, pre-delayed that. We could see the timings for all the other tracks are exactly aligned, and this one is shifted a little bit forward in time, and together they all sound like this.
I get those goosebumps every time. I need the Heimlich, throw it to the side, yo. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, when you throw it to the side, yo.
There's two ad-libs hiding in there. And that's basically it. All of these techniques, making sure you hear compression, making sure you hear EQs, takes time. You can copy exactly what I did here too, but just like copying Travis Scott's original vocal, it won't be something that will help you if you don't learn the skill. You could do everything with one EQ and one compressor. All of the vocal secrets lie in those two effects, and they lie in your ear. I made huge moves on the EQ with this song, but if I didn't have the ear that I have to make sure that that didn't sound presentable doing those big moves, it would not have sounded good at all. If you go and put those exact settings on your things right now, that might be a good place to start. That's actually probably a good place to start. But know that you need to be able to tweak that in order to get something that's really at the maximum potential that you could have. It should take a long time to develop that as well. If I missed anything in the video though, I didn't go over specifically what would work for what type of instrument, leave a comment below. I hoped this helped. It was such a long time coming. Life is a goalie, man. I hope that I didn't take too long making this video. Thank you so much for the suggestion. I know a lot of people want this. Thank you guys just for watching. Please leave a comment and a like down below on this video if you liked it. I really would appreciate that. It goes a long way for a small channel. But thank you guys just for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.